Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
Welcome to Cymera, the sci-fi, horror and fantasy writing festival based in Edinburgh, but coming at you from the online world this year. Before we begin, and for the viewers at home, I'd like to give a brief introduction to my panel today. Elizabeth Priest. Hello, Elizabeth. Is a fantasy writer living in Hastings. Obsessed with chasing fairies since early childhood, she has a history, literature and creative writing BA from the University of Chichester, where she spent a great deal of her time attending free lectures on folklore and mythology to round out the corners on her quest, and has been working on the Tritspawned series of YA novels ever since. And on to Francesca Noto. You are a journalist, editor and book translator who has had a passion for writing since she was a young girl. She also has a PhD in archaeology from Rome University. Tor Vergata. She is the author of 3 urban fantasy novels published in Italy by Astro Edizioni, winning the International Montefiore Award in 2016 with the first of them, Il segno della tempesta.
Yeah, the sign of the storm.
Yay! She lives in Rome with her husband Marco, her 2 daughters Mila and Georgia, and 2 crazy chinchillas.
Yeah.
Okay. And on to Holly. Holly Race. You worked in television drama as a script editor and development executive before deciding to focus on your own writing. She was selected for the Faber Academy novel writing course, where she wrote her young debut novel Midnight Twins. She has developed and written an original TV pilot, The Wishes, and is currently working on new series ideas, along with writing the 2nd book in her YA trilogy. Welcome, everybody. Now, normally I would have an audience, so I'll just do all the clapping. Okay, so the theme of this event is putting the folk into fantasy. Now, having read all your books, I was thrown into worlds of fairies, covens, magic portals, and dream worlds, which make nightmares seem like a walk in the park, to be fair. So I am finally excited to be able to find out more and to chat to you today. Holly, your book, Midnight Twins, to me, it had a feel of Inception meets Rivers of London. Can you give the viewers a brief summary of the novel and explain a little bit about the world you have created?
Sure. So the novel follows a 15-year-old Fern who discovers very early on in the book that her mother, who she thought died in her sleep naturally when she was a baby, may not have died naturally after all, and may in fact have been a warrior in a secret army who protects us from our nightmares when we go to sleep. So the action goes between our world, although a world not under lockdown, and the world of Annwn, which in Welsh mythology means the other world, and that's the world that we go to when we sleep. So it's like an alternative universe that's really powered by our imaginations.
Excellent. Oh, wow. I mean, honestly, that book. Yes, sleepless nights, all of you. Can I just say, yes, sleepless nights. Okay, Elizabeth, can we go into you about your concrete fairy, please? With an alternative Pied Piper causing all sorts of issues for the characters, could you provide a quick insight into your story and the reality it involved?
Yeah, it's set in a fake English village, but it's set in the modern real world, following, I think, 17-year-old Ali, and she kind of stumbles onto the Pied Piper hanging out in her street, and through a series of much nosiness and running around, discovers the world of fairy, and then one of her friends wanders off into it because teenage girls, and she has to go rescue her from the world of fairy, and that's pretty unusual in her life. It's not like a strong fantasy world. It's, oh look, this exists now.
That's just, yeah, I mean, even the shop, it's, I mean, I'm trying, it's very hard to do an event like this without spoilers, but that the shop that you used in that as a, oh, every time I pass one of them now, I'm like, ooh, I wonder if I should go in and see if I can find something. Anyway, Francesca, Sons of Storm. I absolutely devoured your book. I thought it was brilliant. The pace never relented. You know, I was expecting to, I'll just read a little bit and then I'll go back. No, I had to read the whole thing. As you expect, with the nod to Norse mythology running through it, can you provide us with a brief summary of the story and the different worlds you have created?
Sons of Storm, I have you see, this is, of course, in Italian, because now, just 2 days ago, it was published in English, so I'm very, very happy. Now we have it on Amazon, and I'm like, oh yeah, great. So it is about Norse mythology, because I'm very fond of that. I've studied it when I was younger. So it is not mythology, but it is sometimes, in any case, reinvented and considered in something that is in our world. So in the story, in Sons of Storm, there are two young guys that are very different one from another, because Nathaniel, one of them, is a shy college student. He should have some particular special powers, because it is his family that has something like that, but he never developed anything like that, so he's very worried about it. And on the other hand, there is Winter, that is an albino young guy. He is street smart, he has not family, and he's very mad at the world. And the two meet under most unlikely circumstances, and they have to return home from a world that is not ours, because there is a portal, there is something that happens, and they happen to find themselves in a world that is not ours. It is this strange world that is the part of fantasy of this book. And in this world, they have to reckon all their powers, all the special bond that is between the two, and they have to find a way home. So this is the adventure. This is the situation in which they find themselves.
Fantastic. All of your stories are just brilliant, and I'm very lucky to have read them already. So for the viewers, I was wondering if you would like to do a reading from your book. Elizabeth, could I get you to do it first, please?
Yeah, I just thought I'd read the opening little bit of Concrete Fairy where she meets the Pied Piper.
Yeah.
I haven't timed it, which I think is pretty fast. It might be too
No, that's
fast.
okay. Don't worry.
Okay. I also tried to not read too fast, so apologies. Okay, it's called first chapter is White Lights. They've replaced the street lights out the front of my house with new power-saving ones that cast a sickly grey, giving the street the atmosphere of a zombie film. It wasn't the cheeriest night I'd spent awake staring mindlessly out of the window. My story began, as many do, at stupid o'clock in the morning, the witching hour, a time known only to unnatural creatures or drunken partygoers staggering home like the cast of a zombie film. And me, though I was definitely neither of those. I was sitting at my window. There was a lot of stuff I could have been doing instead. Reading, perhaps, writing my university application, finishing coursework due in the next few weeks. But I'd gone to bed, and that meant drawing a line under regular activities. I had chosen watching the new streetlights, and I was going to see it through, because some decisions you just have to live with. It was late, this was what passed for logic. I wondered if it might not be better to just lie down and stare at the ceiling instead. But to my amazement, a distraction came along, and what an improvement on a random cat fight in the street. A young man came round the corner. He was tall, scruffy, and had white guy dreadlocks, long, tangled and hanging loose to his shoulder blades. He blended in well with the background. His hair was black, his t-shirt dark grey, jeans a lighter grey to match the pale paving slabs. I shrank back behind my curtains, immediately terrified that he'd see me. But he didn't look up, and I got bolder with my peeking. I didn't have any lights on, but the street lights were probably at least strong enough to outline my pasty, freckled face for anyone to see if they scanned the row of houses. On the other hand, he seemed completely uninterested in the houses around him, mooching along with his hands in his pockets and minding his own business. He cut across the street and glanced around as if checking the ground, then sat right down on the pavement opposite my neighbour's house. With his head tipping back to face the stars, I could just make out that his eyes were closed like he was meditating. I couldn't understand it. Why would anyone want to sit on a chilly pavement wearing just t-shirt and jeans in the middle of night in March? I had to find out what this was all about. I slipped on the flip-flops that always sat beside my bed instead of slippers or house shoes, already beginning to wonder if this was entirely sane. But I found myself sneaking over to the door and peering out into the hall. From my parents' room I could hear gentle snores from my mum. My spongy flip-flops cushioned my steps and I made my way down the stairs, avoiding the creaky patches. I grabbed the spare keys from the shelf in the hall and pushed the door open. The air was icy after the centrally heated warmth of our house, but I went out without grabbing a coat. It felt sort of rude to my guest. My flip-flops scuffed along the path. I stood at this tall hedge that grows by our gatepost and makes it impossible to get out of the drive without nearly causing major traffic incidents, if there was ever major traffic on our road in the first place. I snapped the twig off the hedge for self-defence. But when I stepped out onto the street and into plain view, I froze, the twig hanging uselessly at my side. This close to the strange dreadlocked man, I lost all my will to bother him. He was so serene, and I could tell he meant no harm, although I didn't know how I knew that. It was just that he radiated this sense of peace. All I could say for sure was that I felt completely relaxed about him being there, all the niggling doubts that he might suddenly leap up and come at me with a knife, vanishing away. He may as well have been another lamppost. I just stood there watching him. After a few seconds, as I was beginning to wonder if this was an awkward moment, or if he genuinely hadn't noticed me, he took a small tin whistle from his pocket, put it to his lips, and blew such a gentle tune that I couldn't believe it came from a whistle. From his lips, it sounded as sweet as the classiest flute, yet as mysterious as the wind in the hills. I sat down abruptly before I could ask myself why I wanted to do it, and listened. His music danced through the still night air, leaping about through pitches, occasionally catching a note like the sound had startled him so much with the intensity that he had to try it again and again. The warbling sound should have sent curtains flying back, windows being levered open to shout insults down at the street. But the stillness of the houses around us remained intact, like I was the only one who could hear the high-pitched trilling. As suddenly as he started, he stopped. Maybe I'd sat there 10 seconds, maybe it had been 5 minutes. I couldn't tell you. He lowered the whistle and looked over at me with his pale grey eyes, catching the white streetlight above him. He smiled mysteriously. What other smile could someone produce at that point? I was about to ask him who he was, but he raised his hand. I shut my mouth, much more interested in what he'd opened the conversation with. I didn't feel I could contribute more than confused noises after the scene he'd made. Well met, he said. You can't talk to me yet. I will explain later. Good night. He unfolded his long legs, trousers flapping around the large rips at the knee, exposing the bony leg beneath the fabric. He stood up, turned, and walked off, all while I sat there, my mouth hanging wide open again like the holes in his trousers, incapable of asking any of the questions I wanted. With a huge shiver running through me, it finally occurred to me that I was sitting on the freezing pavement with bare legs. My arms had huge goose pimples and I was shaking like crazy. So much it was hard to struggle up again. The backs of my legs groaned and complained, throbbing from the cold as I straightened them and stamped on the ground. I glanced over my shoulder and as I hurried back to the house, the dreadlocked man was disappearing round the corner. I reckon the experience had been in the top 10 of strangest things that had ever happened to me. I went inside to make myself a cup of tea.
Oh, fantastic. Love that. Just brilliant. I can't talk to you yet. Oh, so exciting. Francesca, could I get you to do a reading from your book, please?
Okay, well, in this part, I'm going to read when we see the character Winter for the first time. As I said, he's a troublesome young guy, and in this first time we see him, he is quite drunk. He has just had a quarrel about his motorbike and kicked some wannabe thief's ass. And he's about to experience something that will really change his life forever. So I'm starting. Okay. I hope you hear me. It is okay. Well, Let's start.
On you go.
He left behind the yellow lights of the Rose Tattoo, taking the interstate south. He didn't know why he went that way. It was an idea like any other, born of instinct, and he had decided to indulge it. The sky grew darker, and the first stars had already appeared in the east. The colors of the sunset turned to reds and purples on his right. He let himself be guided by the hoarse and laborious song of the engine, the old Sportster between his thighs, like a lover too big for him, expert and fiery, the view that at times blurred. Bent forward on the white tank, he felt the wind whipping at his face of an almost unnatural pallor, his hair as clear as snow, whipping his cheeks into splintered strands. Like many times before, he was leaving behind his own story, hoping to start over, that it would be better. He would not go back. He had left behind a childhood and an adolescence growing up between several homes in Queens, the squalid recurrence of uncertain foster families who soon got tired of him and his mess, the endless succession of social workers and shrinks trying to understand what was broken in his head. For years, they had tried to understand what no one but him seemed to understand. And then, once he turned 18, he had signed a form and had gone his own way. He had begun then to leave behind sleazy motels and complicated relationships, precarious jobs and hostile roles and gazes. He was tired of being considered different, moving on the razor's edge of a life that he didn't understand. Belonging was not for him. He had never had that experience. This he knew. As the speed increased and the shiny black tarmac seemed to sway like a snake, a sinuous and immense black mamba that was lost in the darkness on the horizon, he felt tears marking his cheeks. Perhaps he was not destined to find what he had always been looking for. Perhaps he was wrong, as they had always painted him. In front of him, the road floated, exploding in indistinct bubbles. He felt the rear wheel suddenly slipping, sliding from below, the excessive speed betraying him. He tried to regain control of the Sportster, but even his old and impetuous lover failed him. The world became a chaos of colors and lights and shadows, and for a long moment, that seems to last forever. He realized he was suspended in the air, his arms spread out like wings. Gravity no longer existed, and he hung upside down in an overwhelming eternity. He had time to think that maybe he had wanted it, that maybe closing the game like that was better, before everything really became unbearable. Then the wings broke. Fate, dark.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Oh, I love that scene. It's so good. It's so good. Oh, so good. Holly, could I get you to do a reading as well, please?
Sure. I was just going to read the opening of.
That's fine.
There we go. The street was full of dreams, and some of them were dangerous. Trolls stepped forth from the concrete undercuts of the South Bank and did battle with packs of wildcats. Cockroaches and rats swarmed towards squeamish dreamers. The flourish of a whale's spout arched up out of the Thames and over the balustrade, spraying Una in lukewarm river water. What Una feared, though, was not a dream at all. The traitor had tracked her from Trafalgar Square, down to the river and across the flotsam-topped water. She thought she had lost it when she went underground, but now she could feel it nearby. Awareness crawled along her arms and up the back of her neck. Somewhere it was watching her. She had been stupid going underground where she didn't have a clear idea of direction. Now she had made the final leg of her journey even harder. She had to get back to Tower Hill, which meant that she'd need to cross the river once more and approach her portal from the south instead of the north as she had planned. Well, there was no point in beating herself up about it now. She had panicked when she spotted the traitor. It was as simple as that, and not one knight would have blamed her. Una peered around the corner. Above her, a flock of vultures circled a pair of dreamers. Vultures in this world didn't tend to wait for carrion. They made their own. No, she couldn't help them. She mustn't. She wasn't a knight anymore. Her obligation was to her family now. No, absolutely not. Don't even think about it, Una. Damn it. Snatching a heavy stone from the ground, she broke cover, running in superhuman strides towards the dreamers. Was that a flash of gold beneath the archway to her left, or was her mind playing tricks on her? The scar on her arm, barely visible in ether, but still a fault line of skin and flesh in Anun, prickled with the memory of its making. If it was the traitor, she had better make this stupid charge worthwhile. She measured her leaps as she drew closer to the dreamers. The vultures were hovering in the gathered lull that precedes an attack. She adjusted her grip on the stone, drew back her arm. Tap, 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 tap. Shit, it was behind her. Bile seeped into her mouth, but she did not falter. The stone hit one of the vultures squarely in the chest, and with a firework boom, the vulture exploded back into Inspire. Una didn't wait to watch. She was already sprinting down the riverbank, away from the clattering gate of the traitor. A raking screech told her that the other vultures had diverted their attention to her as well. Their shadows made whirlwinds on the pavement around her, growing darker and thicker as they descended. One dived, its claws ripping at her hair. She knocked it off and built up speed. Past bicycles, leaping over dreamers and moving cars, faster, faster, away from the golden traitor and the nightmares that accompanied it. A human screamed behind her. She glanced back. The traitor was gaining on her, but though she kept moving, she couldn't help but see the bundle of clothes and hair heaped on the ground behind it. One of the dreamers she had saved from the vultures only seconds ago, cut down just for being in the traitor's path. A rivulet of blood was already winding its way from the dying body to the churning life of the Thames. Una's terror expelled itself as a throaty cry. She turned and ran, faster than she had ever run before in this world or the other, leaving the vultures behind but unable to shake that relentless tap-tap of the traitor's claws. Dawn was already breaking, autumnal fingers turning the river to flame and the skyline to shadow. An arctic wind blowing upstream numbed Una's face. With a crack, part of the river iced over. Dreams formed there, skaters in mufflers, polar bears and penguins. Una seized her chance. Sliding out onto the ice, she aimed for the middle of the water. If the traitor followed her, surely the ice would break beneath its weight. Beyond the frost, a sailing boat was making good time. With a great effort, Una leaped for the ship's side and swung herself on board. Dreamers and dreams alike craned over the sides and hung from the poles, but Una ignored them all. She shimmied up the tallest mast and looked back towards the shore. The traitor was there. Its head, smooth and featureless except for 2 black pinpricks for eyes, followed her. Woman and monster stared at each other. Then the boat swung to the east, and the traitor fell out of view.
Oh, just brilliant. I love that. Yeah, absolutely love that. Thank you so much for reading from your stories. I mean, the great thing about an event like this is you get to hear the beginning when it all starts and you think, oh, what is that? What does that mean? Is that going to happen? Oh, who's that? And, you know, and it's just a fantastic way to get the reader into your world as much as you're writing the words for them. So brilliant. Inspiration for stories comes in many different disguises, especially stories involving myths, legends and lore. So without too many spoilers, Holly, could you give me an idea of what an alternative London, a huge part of your story, did you originally plan to have an underworld pitted against reality? I mean, Una and her brother Ollie share a reluctant bond, that's to be fair, amidst harrowing events that have shaped their relationship. How did you work out the necessary steps they had to take to ensure the plot moved forward?
I think
I think especially with fantasy and sci-fi, but with all writing really, it's a bit of a Rubik's cube, isn't it? That you're constantly sort of moving parts to try and make something work better, and then that makes something else work worse, and so you have to sort of pull at different threads all the time. I mean, I had the idea for the world first because I've always had really vivid nightmares, and I wanted to explore what would have happened if those nightmares had been real and I had genuinely been in danger. But it took me quite a while to land on my characters. But when I got Fern and Ollie, the two twins in the story, in place, then everything else sort of started to come together a bit more, and it became a bit clearer what their journeys would have been like. But a lot of that did come from thinking about the world of Annwn, which is very loosely based on Arthurian legends and Celtic folklore, and an epic poem called The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, which I studied at university and sort of fell in love with. But I didn't do an awful lot of kind of planning of that world. I sort of let Fern and Ollie guide me a little bit into where they wanted to go in that world, and then looked into it and created the world around their journey, really, rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Did you at any point, did they take you somewhere that you didn't expect to go when you were writing?
Yeah, definitely. I did originally, because I'd never done this writing a novel thing before, spent ages planning the novel, and I had everything in great detail down to, what exactly was going to happen in each part of each chapter. And then on chapter 2, I think something else happened. I was like, oh, didn't see that coming. Well, that's the whole plan out the window. Great 3 months of work there. A lot changed in just writing the first draft from what I'd planned, because some of the characters did stuff that just made sense once I was writing them. And then an awful lot changed in the edits as well, especially after I got the publishing deal. My editor came at me with this massive list of questions and plot holes, and I was like, oh God, okay. Gonna need a lot of work.
Yeah, the element of surprise. Brilliant. Francesca, could I ask you first about Nathaniel and Winter, and their relationship changes as they go from one world to the next? How much did you have to plan and research to weave the elements of Norse mythology so meticulously through the book to make it realistic to you and your readers?
Yeah, of course. In my case, there were two important topics of research, because there is the folklore part, all about Norse mythology, even if as I said, there is a reimagining of it in my novel. And then there is the linguistic part, because there is, as you know, a special language spoken by particular people in my story. So I started from ancient Icelandic, from Ireland, the language in which the Norse poems and myths are originally written. And I developed something similar as a language with a realistic grammar and syntax. So you can find in my word there's words and also entire sentences in this specific Norse language, and spoken by some people in the book. As far as the folklore part is concerned, I couldn't do without some classics like the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, that is the most important Viking epic poem. And another thing that I want in my book are horses. As you maybe have seen reading the book, I always have some horses in my stories because I am very fond of these animals, and I've been riding since I was younger, and I still do. So I want to make sure that when I write about horses or riding, everything is clear and realistic. Because often I find things that are not so realistic about horses or riding in fantasy novels. And this troubles me so much, so I would like to be realistic and good about that, because I like it. So another research was about that.
Excellent, that's brilliant. Elizabeth, Ali finds herself in a world that doesn't seem quite real, with fairies involving a huge part in the overall story arc. Can you tell us a bit more about how you planned the involvement of their lore, and perhaps touch on the fantasy elements of the characters you decided on?
I suppose the research wasn't so much. It was more like just having always been obsessed with fairies. Writing a fairy world came extremely naturally. I guess I did study a lot of folklore and fairy tales at university, but I was already writing the first book at this point. So, gosh, I even tried thinking about it, and in preparation, I just don't know. Like fairies, I grew up surrounded by fairies and fairy stories, and you know, the only thing you can really do at that point is go back and read all the stuff, which is like, how do you make them edgier? What did they used to be like before you read about them as a kid? And then it's like everybody thinks, oh, it's so edgy to find the fairies that are like dark and scary, because you know, we grow up with the fairy tales of cute fluffy fairies. And it's like, what if you had cute fluffy fairies, but they weren't as fluffy, they were just like halfway more terrible, and something a bit more
like, I suppose it's like the Grimm's fairy tales, isn't it? You know, if you read them now, it's wow, I can't believe my parents used to read that to me before I went to sleep at night, because some of them are quite horrific. So that's the kind of feeling that I got from your book. It was like, wow, this is so dark in places, but it's a character that I know so well.
But nobody eats anybody whole.
But
I wanted the like mythological thing, like, you know, you read the story of the Pied Piper and it's just like, I mean, if he was like a physical character still running around in the world, what would he be doing? Why would he have done what he did? Like, how could you ever justify bringing him back? And you know, not making it entirely just about answering for his crimes of stealing a whole town full of children, and like he's a sympathetic character where that's like almost no aspect of him except for how you shouldn't follow him. But,
you shouldn't know.
No.
Went to the ways,
there's a strange like, balancing act of the folklore I grew up with and hammering it into shape to be safe to write and not be like, okay, so this is the scene where they would cannibalize each other in the fairy tales, so
it reminded me a little bit of the child catcher and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That elusive kind of, oh, come and follow me, and I was a bit like, no, I don't want to do that, you know. You wrote him very well, I have to say. He was very creepy, but in an intriguing kind of way. And I did kind of feel myself wanting to follow him, but I knew that it was just going to end up in tragedy of some kind. So thank you so much for that. Now, I've asked you both, all of you, to read another part from your book that you felt was pushing the plot forward, or perhaps the introduction to a fantastic new character that the reader hadn't met yet. Francesca, could I get you to read your second reading first, please?
Yeah, okay. So for my second reading, of course, this is later in the story. Nathaniel and Winter are already in another place and time. They will need to find a way to come back to our world. And, they have found shelter in this place, in another guy's home. This guy is going to help them in this journey. And this that I'm reading is what happens when they fall asleep in this night. So, after a while, they found enough comfortable clothing to be satisfied. They ate of the supplies the trader had left them before lying exhausted on the used bed, protecting themselves against the cold air with what looked like a feather-filled quilt. It was dusty and with a vague hint of mold, but warm. Any attempt to chat failed as they both gave in to sleep, inevitable after a long day of travel and a warm and relaxing bath. Winter didn't wake up screaming, as had happened a couple of times even in the last few days. It was Nathaniel who woke up towards dawn, when the first blaze of thin light leaked from the closed shutters, dancing insistently on his face. He frowned, wondering for a moment where he was, and realizing that he wasn't in his bed, neither in New York, nor in Maple Tree Farm. In the handful of seconds that his brain took to remind him that he was in a universe away from home, he also noticed the pleasant warmth which he felt given off from the body huddled against his. He remained motionless. He even stopped breathing, while the awareness of the gentle weight pressed against his back became powerful and concrete. He felt Winter's warm and regular breathing on the nape of his neck, his knees pressed in the hollow of his own. He had wrapped a white and tattooed arm around his chest, squeezing in gently. They lay there, tight and snug, like two spoons inside a drawer. No nightmares, no tears, no soft cry into the dark, only that unconscious search for contact. Nathaniel sighed. He crouched better in that bland and dreamlike embrace, letting his muscles relax once again, and he returned to sleep.
They have such a fantastic relationship, don't they? It's just such an amazing, when you read at the very beginning and then you see how they grow, and then when you go into the other world, it's just
it's a story of growing up, of passing from adolescence to adulthood, and it's done with a story like that, with a story of difficult fight, of difficult decisions, hard decisions, and for both of them. And yes, I like them too. And it was amazing how they developed in my head, because I always start from the characters when I start a story. And the characters need to talk to me. They have to tell their story to me after, and then after I can tell the story. And it's like I'm not entirely inventing the character, as allowing him to reveal himself to me. So it's really an exciting process, and in Sons of Storm it happened, and it happened often, and I was very, very grateful for that.
Brilliant, that's brilliant. Holly, would you like to do another reading, please?
Sure. I'm just going to read from just a little bit further on from my first reading. This is from the point of view of Una's daughter, Fern, who is now 15 years old. As I reach the station and pass through the ticket barriers, my phone vibrates with a message inside my bag. I bet it's Dad with another of his attempts at a motivational joke. But then I think of Ollie again and check. Maybe it's an explanation for his behaviour, or more likely a cutting remark about our dead mother being my only friend. I'll be thinking of you tonight. It's from neither Ollie nor Dad. I raise my eyebrows as I reply to the unknown sender. Wrong number. Tonight's Halloween, and it sounds as though someone's got big plans. Good luck to them. Mine involve changing into pyjamas as soon as humanly possible and cramming for a history test. On the tube, I studiously avoid the curious, pitying glances of my fellow commuters and stare at the front cover of Metro. The headline reads, "Ratings soar for Sebastian Madraut." The photo doesn't do justice to the politician, or at least not to his eyes. I've seen him in person outside school. His deep violet irises, somewhere between amethyst and sapphire, made a cyclist crash into a lamppost thanks to an ill-timed double-take. He has always laughingly denied they are lenses, and I've always believed him. I know all too well that eyes do indeed come in all colours. I can only read a snippet of the article. In recent years, Madraut has made a staggering comeback to once again capture the hearts and minds of a nation. A typical puff piece, then. The person whose paper I've been reading catches my eye and rustles the pages irritably. I resist the urge to point out that newspapers can, shock horror, be read more than once, and slide my drawing pad out of my bag. When I come up for air at Sloane Square, I reach into my bag to check the time on my phone. The unknown number has messaged again. Have you never wondered about your mother's death, Fern? I stop dead in the middle of the pavement, and a man glares as he pushes past. Who is this? I reply, shock making my fingers clumsy. But they don't respond. They haven't replied by the time I reach Bosco College, or by the time I'm forced to put my phone away at the start of double biology. They haven't replied by first break, when I am interrupted in my toilet haven by Lottie Madraut and her harem, or by the time break ends and I slip into the back of the Latin classroom. Why would I wonder about Mum's death? It was simple. She passed away in her sleep. Sudden death syndrome. Rare, tragic, but it happens to all sorts of people. There has never been anything to question. It is only when I am standing in the lunch queue that my phone vibrates again. My whole body flushes as I spot the words on the screen. Your mother knew me by another name, but you may call me Archimago. Then, soon afterwards, she and I were knights together in Anun. Archimago, Anun. I may as well still be in Latin for all the sense these words make. I have had time to order my thoughts now, though, and I know what I want to say. I won't be distracted by a strange vocabulary. What did you mean about my mum's death? This time, the reply comes almost immediately. Una didn't die peacefully at all. She was murdered. It's as though the mysterious Archimago has reached through the phone screen, through my ribcage, and is squeezing my heart, tight, tight, tight. I place a hand over my mouth to stop myself from showing too much emotion. No one else in the queue seems to have noticed my reaction, though. Half of them are glued to their phone screens too. I look from face to face, wondering whether this is a malicious prank by one of my peers. How do you know? I reply, and after a moment I deliberately put my phone back into my bag. If Archimago is watching, I don't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing how shaken I am. I stare straight forward, my elbow pressed against my bag to feel the vibration should another message arrive. I choose a chicken curry and chocolate sponge and take my lunch to my usual table where everyone knows not to bother me. Those words, she was murdered, ricochet around my skull until they break apart. She was murdered. Was she murdered? Murdered she was. I can't help it. I place my phone next to my plate. Elsewhere in the hall, Lottie Madraut's ringing laugh carries over the other voices. Spoonful of curry halfway to my mouth. The screen lights up once more. Archimago has replied. I draw the phone towards me and rice spills in maggoty drips into my lap. Because I killed her.
Ooh.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's a massive ba-ba moment, isn't it? Wow. What a great reading to pick, I have to say. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Elizabeth, would you like to read another section from your story, please?
I thought I'd go quite far ahead and introduce one of the other mythological creatures or people, and I didn't put the... Sorry. I bookmarked the wrong chapter. I don't remember my own novel. Hang on, give me a
We'll be in there.
Take your time. Yep,
I
that's
saw
fine.
the chapter title, I was just like, oh yeah, that's it.
Holly, could you hold up your cup again?
It's my octopus.
I just spotted that.
Wow.
Is that an octopus?
It's an octopus.
You're an octopus. It's Tulu.
I love it. I love it so much.
Wonderful.
I saw it on an episode of Criminal Minds, believe it or not, and I just had to have it. So I went on a long Google search for it. Yeah.
That's
Excellent.
a good end of a mission. Okay. Right.
Okay.
This is the introduction of the Green Man. And basically they've gone to the fairy world. It's a little bit later in the book. And they happen to get captured by some goblins, and they take the girls who have been searching for their friend Tanya to a strange little bit of the woods. It seemed the goblins had prepared for their own fair that day. The trees were fully green by now, almost summery in the lushness of their leaves, but only recently swamped by natural decorations were miles of green streamers, so numerous that the undersides of the trees at least must have felt as green as summer while they were still bare. Long ribbons hung in the still quiet air, and each tree was linked by a dozen crisscrossing lines, with fake leaves sewn of green silk, spaced at close intervals. Compared to the bold designs, the real leaves seemed fragile, almost crystalline if that was possible. There was no bright sun to shine through them, yet they held a sort of inner glow, like they didn't care. I'd already long had the impression that science didn't often come here for a picnic. I was amazed we were still stuck to the ground by gravity, though I had to do a double-take check, so dazed was I at everything going on around me. Even the bare earth had long carpets in green and gold spread higgledy-piggledy over the dark mud at the base of the tree. They bucked and sometimes just plain hung over the huge roots, but points for effort, I suppose. And over those carpets danced dozens of feet. Pixies or goblins or whatever seemed to have serious hyperactivity issues. All the ones we'd met had been constantly dancing or skating. The ones clustered around the tree, their strange bodies taking all sorts of horrible animal shapes, were no different. They capered in no obvious order, but the longer I watched them, the more uncomfortable I felt. They were clearly doing something purposeful. They were carrying about branches and leaves and handfuls of moss. They tumbled all over the place, but eventually these bits and pieces made it to the far side of the tree. "What are they doing?" Teb asked after we had stood and watched for several minutes. "Wait and see," Beaky told her. "After dragging us over here, you may as well explain what's going on," she grumbled. I know she didn't want to look surprised at whatever happened next. "It's almost begun," was all Piggy would say, and even that got him an elbow to the ribs from his bony friend when he tried gesturing at a particularly large huddle of goblins. They would have drawn the eye anyway. They were carrying the largest object we'd seen so far. All the bits of tree before that point suddenly looked like twigs in comparison. At first I took it to be more branches. The object certainly was mossy green and brown, ivy hanging from it in long trailing curtains. But the shape beneath was far too regular, and I suddenly remembered that room in the museum in Billsworth that Ted would always dare me to go in, and I wouldn't, because the walls of that particular room were lined with hundreds of stuffed animal heads, shot by cruel local hunters in the Victorian period, and donated to the museum by some rather disturbed families on their deaths. There were many pairs of antlers displayed on shields, sans the deer's head they'd been ripped from. Just the memory of that room made me shudder. "What are those for?" Teb demanded shrilly. Maybe she'd been scared of the room too. Maybe that was why it had been so important for her to make me terrified of it. "Shush," Beaky said, much more harshly than he'd spoken before. The gaggle of goblins carried the huge antlers away behind the tree. I glanced at Alana, wondering if she might have a clue about what was going on, but her face was rigid. I couldn't have said if it was from uncertainty or fear. We found out soon enough, in any case. A huge groan shook through the ground. That was followed by a roar which made the groan seem like a warm-up. I clung to Ted, but she scornfully pushed me away. I transferred my death grip to Alana, who was much more scared and therefore compliant. I just wished it wasn't our previously in-control tour guide who was the one frozen in fear. A ripping sound came next. This time nothing shook but the trees. Newly sprouted leaves came falling down, still glowing softly as they settled on the muddy carpets. And then he came into view. The goblins clustered triumphantly around him, chattering with delight. "Oh my God," Teb said. The man who had emerged, apparently from the tree, was definitely not the sort of man you would take home to your parents. Well, my mum might be unnervingly cool with him, but he was 8 or 9 feet tall, and I was left in no doubt that he was the green man that I had heard so much about. While genuinely bare skin was a rare thing on this naked giant, what we could see indeed was the same hue as the leaves around him, but soft, dark moss grew all over him, and oak leaves sprouted across his body, following the lines of bodily hair, running down the sides of his arms, his chest and stomach. His long hair was of a curtain of ivy and oak, and his beard the same. Leaves even seemed to tug at the corner of his mouth, as if he could open it and spew more out. The antlers had been rammed onto his head without much care. Amber blood oozed around where they had recently been joined to his scalp, and a trickle ran, shining brightly, down his green forehead, soaking into his mossy eyebrows. His lower body was barky. His thick legs, lichen splattered and with ivy twisting up and down, creaked like branches in the wind as he stretched and tested his strength. His legs bent strangely, ending in huge deer-like hooves, living wood, part satyr, part tree, all newly awoken god. I really can't emphasize just how big he was.
That's brilliant. Well done. It just, oh, those eyes. I had to turn the book cover over because I didn't want to look at it at night because I could just see his eyes staring at me.
Unfortunately, my brother, who grew up in Hastings with me, has a mortal terror of the Green Man, and I absolutely love him. And we do Jack in the Green in Hastings, so every single year there's a Jack procession with a green man through the centre of town, and my brother is so scared he just won't come to town during that time, and I just love it.
It's a way to get back at your siblings, I think.
I feel really guilty that I got a book and there's the Green Man on the cover. And then I, buy my book.
That's brilliant. I like that. So obviously, as writers, you started off as young people. What books did you read that you thought, oh, this is what I want to do, I want to be a writer? Franny, could you give us a...
Okay, well, there is in fact a particular book that I read when I was, I guess, about 10, maybe younger, that effectively made me think, yeah, I want to write stories too. And it was Ronia, and it was by Astrid Lindgren, that is the author of Pippi Longstocking, I think it's so. In Italian is Pippi Calzelunghe, and among others. And this Ronia was, in fact, a fantasy novel, a sort of fantasy novel. And it was maybe the first fantasy novel I read. And I was so caught in the story and the characters. Then when I finished reading it, I was so sad. And it was just like, an epiphany to me, because I too wanted to create compelling stories to be read and loved. And I wanted to give a good message too. So who knows, maybe after all this time, maybe I managed to do it. I don't know, in the end, we will see if readers will be of this opinion. I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing how our inspiration comes from places that we didn't expect, or maybe from many years ago.
Yeah.
Holly, how about yourself?
So I didn't want to be a writer when I was younger. My mum was a published author and a journalist, and I saw kind of firsthand just how hard it is to be a writer. Just everything that goes with it. I mean, I know that we're extraordinarily privileged to be able to have our books published and everything, but it's really tough. And I saw my mum go through that, and I was like, I'm not doing that. That looks really difficult. But I always really loved books. You know, I grew up surrounded by them because of my mum's job. And for a while, she was the book editor of a big magazine, and she would bring books home, children's books home that had been recommended to her and stuff. So many influential books that I read when I was little. I've got sort of here we go. I've got The Ghost Drum by Susan Price, which is incredible. It's Russian folklore, and The Snow Spider by Jenny Nimmo, which is incredible as well. I don't know if any of you guys have read it. That's based on Welsh folklore. So I love those books. I love Narnia, all the usual. So I ended up going into sort of careers that edged around writing. I went into theatre for a while and worked with writers, with playwrights, and then I worked with writers in TV and film as a script editor and a script reader, and loved it. I love working with writers, and you learn so much from other writers, I think. But then this idea for this book just kept on plaguing me, and I was like, oh, I really want to write it. And eventually my husband was like, look, stop talking about it, just write the damn thing. For God's sake. See whether you can do anything with it. And then I started writing, and I never really looked back, to be honest. And I remember telling my mum that I was like, I think I do actually want to be a writer, and she was like, oh no. Okay. Right, here we go.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And Elizabeth, how about yourself?
Oh gosh, my parents were writers as well, so they told me not to. My dad threatened to hit me with a stick if I ever became a writer. He didn't hit me with a stick.
I hope not.
But I obviously grew up reading a lot of books as a result of that as well. Same story. One of the books that I think really influenced me, especially for Trout's Pond, was In the Time of the Ghost, or The Time of the Ghost by Diana Wynne Jones.
She's brilliant.
Yeah, it had a whole kind of, it went really spooky and kind of pagan, like odd. It wasn't even like a fairy tale. It was just kind of like what teenager, like raw teenage energy can do, like with magic and stuff. I read it hundreds of times as a kid, so I think a bit of that vibe got into the story. If you read it.
It's hard not to. Yeah.
You should read it. It's probably a billion times better than anything I can write.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all.
Diana Wynne Jones is the champion of. champion of realistic horses in fiction, Francesca.
There we go. There you go, Francesca.
Thank you.
Good shout. And out of your books, what character in your books do you relate more to? Are they got snippets of you in them, or have you tried not to have that personal touch? Holly, would you like to?
Yeah, I think the two characters I relate to the most, it's Fern, because she's quite socially awkward, which I relate to a lot, and she sees the worst in people, which I have a tendency to do if I'm honest. But also the villain, who I won't say because that who they are, because that's a bit of a spoiler. But they I couldn't quite get their character right. It just kept on feeling really kind of false and like mustachio, curling, cliche fantasy villain. And then I was like, what do I relate to about them? And as soon as I figured that out, then suddenly it started to make sense a bit more, and they felt a bit more real and truthful, I suppose. So I do relate to them as well.
Brilliant. And Elizabeth, what about yourself?
Well, because it's a bunch of 4 teenage girls, and I happen to be in a friendship group of 4 teenage girls, I will swear to my dying day that they're not directly based on my friends, but my friends love to sort of say, oh, this one's me, that one's me. And they're usually wrong about what I was drawing on, but it is quite obvious that the main character is a bit of a Mary Sue of me, but in a kind of hopefully genre acceptable way. She's very awkward and talkative and anxious and babbles on and on and on and on. So, but yeah, I suppose the whole point of writing things like that is you sort of put yourself into it and then sort of throw yourself at the story. So I'm going to claim a get out of jail free card for that one.
I'll come back to you about that then. And Francesca?
Oh, well, in my story, I liked both the characters, and when they start to interact between them, there is something about me, both in Nathaniel and in Winter. But I guess maybe Nathaniel is a bit like I was at this age, so very worried about what I would do in my future, and if I was somehow disappointing my parents and the people around me. So it's a bit of a character that I can relate with him, and maybe it was something of me that was inside him when I wrote about him. And as far as Winter is concerned, I know that he's a quite difficult character. He has a lot of things that are not quite easy, and so I think that maybe it's the kind of thing that you would like to do sometimes in your adolescence, the wrong thing that maybe sometimes you would like to do and you don't do. So Winter is in this sense kind of it's like to say, okay, let's do it, it's okay, even if it's wrong, let's do it. And it's such a freedom, sometimes. And so maybe the lawless Winter is just like that for me.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I could sit and talk to you all for hours about your books. They're just amazing. And I thank you so much for coming on, and a big round of applause. Not that we have an audience, but I will be your audience for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.